Bala was skeptical of people who assumed the mask of God, but there were a few who had her full trust and respect. One such was Chandrasekhara Saraswati, Paramacharya of the Shankara Mutt at Kanchipuram. Another was a yogi named Ramalingam Padagacheri Swamigal, who was a constant source of reassurance to Bala. It was at his suggestion that she visited the shrine of the goddess Karumari at Thiruverkadu. This was 1947, a time of profound disillusionment for Bala. Her health was poor, her way of life and system of beliefs had been legislated as immoral and illegal, and she was penniless. The trip to Thiruverkadu was made possible by mortgaging a ring for a small loan to pay for the bus rides. Nevertheless, this trip left Bala feeling reassured of divine protection. Several people supported Bala during this period and further in her crusade against social prudery. T.K. Chidambaranatha Mudaliyar, the great Tamil savant, Kalki Krishnamurthy, then editor of the weekly Ananda Vikatan, and Dr. V. Raghavan, newly elected secretary of the Madras Music Academy, were amongst those who firmly stood by her.
I came under her wings when I was 5 years old. My sister Premvada, elder sister Premvada, was Balasaraswati's first student at the school established for training students under the guidance of Srimati Balasaraswati in the year 1953. My father, Dr. V. Raghavan, secretary of the Music Academy and an illustrious Sanskrit scholar, was a great admirer of Balasaraswati right from early 30s. And he wanted both Premvada and myself to be trained under this great legend, whom he thought was the byword, the final word in Bharatanatyam. My joy was to go there and sit by 4:30 by Gudumandam, Sri Venkatramaya and Jayamma, and attend to their errands, especially to Jayamma. Listening to Jayamma singing, even though at that young age I didn't realize there is so much of soul-filling power in her voice. Usually in her Padam Abhinaya sessions, any great musician would walk in, like Sri Ramanathapuram Krishnan, KV and KV Narayana Swami. They were all regulars. And at that time the class would stop their musical experiences and this kind of jugalbandi singing. These are all great experiences that some of us had in Bala's class. And great artists came like Payanti Malaji and Padmini Ragini. Brijuji, favorite of Bala, Shambhu Maharaj.
The Balasaraswati School of Classical Indian Music and Dance was opened at the Madras Music Academy in 1953, supported by a grant from the Sangeet Natak Academy.
It was not about money ever, but I just needed to point out I had classes 5 days a week for every week obviously, and my mother paid I think 25 rupees a month to learn from Balasaraswati.
The enthusiasm and persistent efforts of the Dutch dance ethnologist Beryl de Zoet rekindled Bala's energy after the lows of the 1940s. It led to renewed performances in Delhi, Bombay and Madras, and recognition and awards followed, with the President's Award from the Sangeet Natak Academy in 1955 and the Padma Bhushan in 1957. Bala attributed the renewal of her career to Beryl de Zoet. In 1956, American modern dancer Martha Graham and her company toured India as part of an Asia tour. Bala attended her performance in Madras and although had never seen modern dance before, was excited. The two became lifelong friends. The US consulate arranged a performance by Bala for Graham, who later remarked, "The musicians began playing and at that moment she began to dance. Her size was no longer visible and I was completely mesmerized. Even though we could not understand the words to her songs, I did not mind because her message seemed clear. I was so intensely involved that I think I was on another plane. I recall it still and can see her before me. Another controversy of the times was a standoff, so to speak, between the traditional practitioners of dance and the proponents of a reconstructed, modernized version of Bharatanatyam. The latter strove to strip away the vulgarities that had enveloped the art with an emphasis on non-Shringara songs, which they felt reflected a more philosophical voice, one that was more dignified, as also to avoid the cutting edge of social disapproval. Bala resented these efforts, ill-conceived in her view, to clean up the act, airing her views urbanely in important forums like the Music Academy and Tamil Isai Sangam. She asserted that there is nothing in Bharatanatyam which can be purified afresh. It is divine as it is, and innately so. For those who have yielded themselves to its discipline with total dedication, dance, like music, is the practice of the presence. It cannot merely be the body's rapture.
Fascinated by the music because her mother was a great musician. A large number of people said they went for the music, not for the dance, because at that time there was not that much interest in the dance, only in the music. I went for both. Family, great musicians. Her dance movements were deeply affected by it. And I am a very particularly fond of music, and so she was able to not only convey the meaning of the dance, but also the emotion of the music. You know, when I first saw her, she was learning. She was a little girl wearing a practice costume, but when I first saw her dance on the stage, she was a young girl. I think 15 or 16 she looked. But she was rather big built, for her age. Although she was very graceful, she was large because she was very tall also. And that is when I saw her. And there was some charm about her. But a lot of people in the beginning didn't appreciate. She became famous, but a lot of people appreciate you after you become famous, not because you have the power to appreciate. That's what happened. And she later on became famous due to people supporting her and all that. The dance itself became very popular, and so she had a great tradition behind her. The child at home would be all the time singing Krishnani, Begani. I did not teach it here because it had become so much like grass growing everywhere. I thought I'll teach something different, but she made a specialty of it. She liked lighter items very much.
It was Pakiriya Pillai's wish that Bala dance at the sanctum of the Murugan temple at Tiruttani. In 1954, Bala visited the temple with Jayamal, Lakshmi and C.P. Srinivasan, a family friend. By then, dancing in temples had been outlawed, and in order to get past the priest, Bala concocted a small tale of how she had forgotten the ritual offering to the deity. The priest volunteered to get the same for Bala from the bottom of the hill, an errand that would take him half an hour. She bribed the watchman into closing the doors of the sanctum, put on her ankle bells, and danced the Khanda Alaripu as her mother sang the Tirupuhar Kurvel Paritta dedicated to Murugan at Tiruttani. Bala recalled the incident later. I only remember the joy I felt at that moment of fulfillment. Years of yearning had come to an end. Bala began to recover from her long bout of ill health after this visit to Tiruttani. The 1960s propelled Bala into the international arena. In 1961, she was invited to perform at the East-West Encounter in Tokyo, followed by more performances in Tokyo, Osaka and Yokohama.
I first saw Bala in May, I think it was, 1961, in Tokyo at a big East-West festival. And the framework was a very large international organization, quite a lot of Western music, and quite a lot of Eastern performance from India, from Japan, from Thailand, from China, I think, from all over. When Bala came on, one knew straight away that it was something quite different. I'd heard of her, just heard of her as being a very good dancer. You knew that she was different, that she had not only a great performing ability, but that she had an extraordinary, what can one say, an extraordinary authority, an extraordinary mastery. And of course she was immensely communicative. There she was on a very large, dull, new, Western-style concert stage, so to speak. No atmosphere, nothing special about it, and she made that. The moment she appeared, she produced the atmosphere, and she took the audience, and the audience was immediately involved in what she did.
In 1962, her first US tour was organized by the Asia Society, New York. An invitation to perform at the Edinburgh Festival followed in 1963. She was undoubtedly the star of the 1963 festival, a year that had such celebrities as Yehudi Menuhin, Martha Graham, Isaac Stern, Benjamin Britten, Peter Pears.
Bala's biggest triumph in the West was at the Festival of Arts in Edinburgh in 1963.
1963 was a kind of Indian year at the Edinburgh Festival. A lot of our great musicians were there, Ravi Shankar, Ali Akbar, Subbulakshmi, various other interesting Indian things, and of course 8 solo recitals by Balasaraswati. All were sold out. And as word got round about the quality of her dancing, requests for seats came pouring in. Reception was, I would say, almost rapturous. It wasn't just a case of rave reviews. Those were there, of course. But there was a feeling in the minds of those who saw her, even those who saw her for the first time, of being in the presence of greatness, as it were. I remember one evening, Martha Graham was sitting in the front row, so overcome with emotion that she couldn't hold back her tears.
I immediately decided to ask Bala to appear at an Edinburgh festival. I was running the Edinburgh Festival then. I was just about to come to my first one, which was in 1961. And I planned a big kind of Indian invasion of the Edinburgh Festival, which worked. And it was spearheaded by, on the one side, by Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar Khan as instrumentalists, and northern musicians, and the Carnatic musicians who are Balasaraswati and Subbulakshmi. So I had very good generals, so to speak, for the invasion. And it was a tremendous success on the stage. And I think we arranged a week of performances for Bala, and it was completely sold out from the start. Certainly, if there was a seat left, it went after the first night. And I asked Bala if she could stay on. She said, yes, why not? It's what I like to do, to dance. So we arranged another week. I think in the end she did double the number of performances. That was the only time I remember doing that while I was in Edinburgh, simply doubling the number of appearances by a single artist. It was very remarkable, tremendously successful. And she became then a sort of new goddess in people's lives.
Bala's illnesses began to take a toll by the end of the 1960s. Still, she managed to perform under increasingly difficult and dangerous conditions. Apart from her own ingenious ways of adjusting her programs and energies, she was greatly helped by the ministrations of her daughter Lakshmi. Lakshmi was born in 1943. Throughout her childhood and early adulthood, she spent all her time with her mother and observed and learnt a lot in the process. She was truly Bala's constant companion, especially during her tours abroad. With her mother's failing health during these years, Lakshmi often stepped in to perform and teach in her mother's stead.
Daughter Lakshmi, taking daily lessons from Bala, carries on the family tradition.
We are so fortunate that she had a daughter like Lakshmi Miss, who was whose life centered around her mother. So she, I think, embodies in the best way possible everything that Balasaraswati stood for. in the creative genius she was, in the human being she was. Everything she was because of her mother. The fiery, feisty personality, the strong, independent, relentless. I will uphold this tradition regardless of what the obstacles may be. And sticking to her roots regardless of where she was in the world.
One of the earliest people to come into contact with Bala in the US was Louise Cripps. She became a lifelong student and was instrumental in organizing Bala's tours abroad, offering much needed logistical support during Bala's performances and residencies.
The phenomenon of Balasaraswati entering the lives of Sam and Louise Cripps, of course, and the family, and is that I did not expect such a thing to happen. None of us, when we find ourselves running along in our lives, making our own decisions, find ourselves faced with something that stops us and changes the direction of our future lives completely. The moment when I was asked to get up and dance, I thought, well, in such a situation, one either doesn't do it and refuses, or one gets up and says, why, I hope I don't die on the spot. But I couldn't say no. So I stood up, and I have no memory of having done anything. Everyone in the family had a conference and came out and said, all right, we will teach you. You begin taking lessons tomorrow morning.
Balasaraswati is acknowledged in the West as having had a profound influence on the evolution of modern dance. Numerous artists of distinction were what they recognized as Bala's superb artistry. Among those who saw her in the first 2 years of touring outside of India were ballerina Dame Margot Fontaine, ethnic dancer La Mary, modern dance pioneer Ted Chan, and Western classical violinist Yehudi Menuhin.
I first saw her in the 1970s, and she revealed to me something I had not previously suspected, which was that the sacred origins of Hindu dance could be revealed to audiences in the West. I had previously seen it mainly as an aesthetic experience. When I saw her, I suddenly realized where the sacred origins of Bharatanatyam lay, and it was only through her own performances and nobody else's.
Charles Reinhardt, director of the American Dance Festival, made the first arrangements for Bala to tour the US in 1962.
Whatever it is, I don't think there are too many people watching dance who would call themselves experts on it, whether it's ballet or modern or Spanish or whatever. So that when a Bala comes along, granted, they may have lost some of the intricacies of the dance movements, but the genius that was Bala came soaring across those footlights like a sledgehammer.
She and Lakshmi had me alone, and Bala said, come, I have something to give you as a gift. I didn't know what to give you, darling, so I want to give you these. These are Bala's second set of bells. Now, if you would be in my place for a second and realize what this might do to your life. These are the bells of one of the world's great artists.
The impact of Bala's art on the West was strong enough to lead to teaching engagements in American universities. Bharatanatyam had indeed come a long way from its home in the temples of South India.
I studied under Bala until she passed away in 1984. She was interested in teaching in the United States and returning for tours.
So it ended up, we invented this organization called American Society for Eastern Arts to get Bala back.
We established a school to make available an educational system that they might not have here in our country, the Guru Sisha system. And under that aegis, we had the Balasaraswati School of Music and Dance. I've been a teacher of Bala style since 1967.
It was Lulu's idea to establish this award for lifetime achievement in teaching at the American Dance Festival and to put it in Bala's name. I loved it for the idea of knowing how important teaching was. That without teaching, there is nothing. Nothing gets passed.
Bala had her first residency for 2 months at the Wesleyan University as part of the 1962 tour. In the years that followed, Bala and other members of her family would find at the Wesleyan an environment capable of sustaining long-term relationships among artists, audiences, and students. Bala taught in her last residency for Asian traditions at Wesleyan University in 1981. Between 1962 and 1981, Bala gave more than 200 programs in the US and taught in 12 residencies.
Wesleyan, when I came there, I was the 4th professor in the music department. Right? We had a pianist, we had a composer, and we had a music history person.
And you were teaching?
I was teaching world music. I mean, we evolved the term and started the program with Runga, and then it gradually expanded. There, 3 people came to study with her who knew who she was. One was Livia Frank, one was Maida Yod, and one was Louise Scripps. It was amazing. It was amazing. The audience understood immediately what she was doing in a foreign language and all of that. Yeah. So then, Wesleyan being Wesleyan, I said, would you mind if I go on tour with them? We'd fixed up a little tour across the country. So then we went to the summer of '74. There were, if I'm not mistaken, there were 45 artists in residence, right? It was wonderful, you know, and those students, all of their lives were changed, I think, that they say so.
In her own country, Bala's lifelong devotion to the cause of Bharatanatyam has won wide recognition. The Academy of Music in Madras, where Bala gives dancing lessons, has conferred on her their highest distinction.
And there's Balama's picture on the front of the paper. She got the Padma Vibhushan. We went, wow, what's her picture doing on the front of the paper? We still did really not understand who she was. We knew for us, she was a great artist, but we didn't understand her importance in the world. We were like, wow. So we walked here. There was a line around the block, and then it was a very quiet street here, and with movie stars and politicians with gigantic malas coming. You know, no artist had ever been given a Padma Vibhushan by then. Ravi Shankar got the one under her that year. And, you know, there was all these people in here, and I thought, well, I'll just peek in the door and tell her, you know, we'll come back tomorrow. And I peeked in the door, and she said to me, come. And she made me alone have my lesson. And this living room was lined with fancy people, you know, holding things. And again, this was a message, an unspoken message of, where were you when I was working this hard and really needed support? And now everybody's jumping on the bandwagon of acknowledgement, and I got a pashmina scarf. I can't eat that. You know, where is the real support? Where is the real understanding for the art that I do?
Outside of her work and her concert tours, Bala leads a quiet life in her home in Madras.
The garden is not the straight route, it goes like this. It moves along with the Sangati. Each and every piece you take, there is a uniqueness, how they portray, how they emote, and the singer has to go with that.
I am the only Natvangam student of Balama. I came to Madras in 1956. I met her. I joined in her dance school. About 10 years training, I started teaching at her school and assisting her for many years.
You can never ever write down anything. Both Bala and Ganeshan, especially Ganeshan, used to make jokes. What ma, you have written in the notebook, that's enough, you will not put it into your blood. Two things in Bala's school a student has to learn: patience and leisure. If you don't have patience, you cannot stay in that class. If you don't have leisure, you will not be able to understand this time.
Whatever you're doing, it had to have that sense of control that it was, and the level of detail that she had thrown at us, because it was so nuanced. And then Lakshmi would have to then step in and say, Amma, like they're children, they can't handle this. And then she'd come and, okay, this is first, second, third, four, like these are the 4, 6 Sancharis variations. And this is what comes after what. And she'd kind of organize it for us. And she'd be able to remember the sequence of the variations so that we could go back to her and kind of have her remind us if we had forgotten. And then we could practice it over and over again. And then we could be able to do it kind of, in a way that she would say, okay. She'd not be, oh, very good or excellent, nothing. You were nowhere near being at that level. But she would say, and that was huge. It took about 2 years to learn Dhanike Varnam. When I learned my second Varnam, I learned it in 2 weeks. And I realized that I was able to learn it in 2 weeks because I took 2 years to learn my first Varnam. And if I hadn't taken the time, they hadn't made sure I took the time to learn it like that, and understand and absolutely immerse myself in every detail of that Varnam, so that I could do it without having to think about it, I wouldn't have been able to learn Amohamana in Bhairavi Ragam or Sarasi Jakshalu in Kalyani.
From 1974 to 1984, it was a decade that involved many journeys. It wasn't just it was many people followed her. Bala was a magical piper. And so, for example, we followed her to Connecticut College, the American Dance Festival, and to Duke University, also with the American Dance Festival. She was like a mother, and Lakshmi was like a sister for any of us who came to study in India itself. So she made sure we were comfortable wherever we were staying. Sometimes we could stay at the home, other times we stayed nearby. She always made sure we had good food. She would also give us little hints of her craft. It made me realize how she herself was always working on her craft. When she was teaching me Sarasi Jakshalu, she said, before you open the lotus, you almost tighten the forehead, so that when you open the flowers, you also open your face. When she came to the United States, she loved to watch television. She liked to watch old Greta Garbo films. Other times, she liked to watch soaps, and she would even turn the sound off so she could watch the close-ups of people and their expressions and their abhinaya.
Lakshmi and Douglas's son Aniruddha was born in 1980. Bala found deep satisfaction in her grandson's early interest in music and dance, probably through exposure while his mother and grandmother taught their students. Aniruddha is the 9th generation representative of an unbroken lineage of practicing hereditary artists.
General notion is to make the nritya appear seamless and with ease. That's why there's a misconception that in this style that there is a quote-unquote lack of technique, but that's not so. That's not how it's approached. It's to make the nritya as sublime as the abhinaya. They both have to work in hand in hand.
In late January 1984, Bala became gravely ill and was admitted to a hospital where she eventually faded into a coma. She breathed her last on February 9, 1984. Among the pallbearers was Mridangam artist Kare Kudimani. Bala's cousin T. Shankaran recalled that the great violinist Papa Venkatramaya had done the same for Veena Dhanammal in 1938.
Ranga